Well, I get a lot of comments, not necessarily about guitars I've worked on, unfortunately, but every time, sometimes when you do a full fret job or whatever, you end up with buzzes on the guitar somewhere, or someone has a question about buzzes. My guitar is buzzing, so you got to identify where the buzz is coming from and why. So one of the first things I do is you got to identify whether it's a fret buzz or whether it's possibly a bracing or something that's loose, because a loose brace will buzz like crazy. The back braces that are up here on this guitar, especially on D28s, D35s, rosewood guitars, they tend to get loose up in the corners, and they will buzz like crazy. And I don't care, everybody will say, oh, it's coming from the bridge, it's coming from the B string. That doesn't make any difference whatsoever. Almost every buzz will sound like it's coming from the bridge. And that's probably just because the body resonates, and that's what amplifies the buzz. So you can't use the location of the buzz necessarily as your guide. You got to go around, you got to tap on things. One of the most common techniques I use is what I call the next fret method. And this is a good way, this next fret thing is useful for lots of things besides looking at buzzes. It's also useful for showing you the effects of neck relief. It's useful for showing you the fact that action doesn't really have anything to do with clearance. And I'll explain some of that later. But anyway, here's the idea, okay? You fret a note up here. Let's go up here, okay? I'm fretting at the 5th fret, 7th fret, and 9th fret. And I'm doing that just because it's in the camera and it's easy to see. And if you turn your guitar over like this, and you do this on your guitar, okay, because I'm having to self-film this, so it's a little tricky showing you. But if you fret this note here, and you look at the clearance up here at the next fret. So how much is this clearing right here? You can either tap it, I mean you can feel it. Let's switch hands here, okay? I'm going to fret here, and then I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to tap. You can feel that, or you can play the note. Let's get over here. You can play the note. It clears. It's got that much clearance, whatever that happens to be. I don't know. Here's your feeler gauge. I'm going to point to it. And it's got, well, what do you know, I just happened to get it. It's got right around 0.08 of an inch of clearance. So you can measure it if you want to. You can stick your feeler gauge in there and you can measure it. It helps a lot to have a light up here. See, there's a light up here. So I'm getting a backlight when I did this. And I can actually see, I'm not sure if it's going to show up in the video or not, but there's actually a shadow on the fret right there. And I look at that shadow and I can see it. And as I come down with the string, I can see that shadow changing. So also helps a lot when you're doing your feeler gauges. You can pop it in there and you can see that shadow. Like I've got a lot of air over here. I can see that. I've got air over here, so my feeler gauge isn't flat. When I get the feeler gauge flat, the shadow is very even. And I can just see a little bit of light under there. I can also tap on it again, just like I do with the fret. Doing that tapping lets you feel things that you might not be able to see. Like if you're old and gray like me, you might have bad eyes, you know, whatever. I can see actually pretty good. I'll drop my glasses now. But anyway, okay, so the next fret. You do this one, you kind of visually look at or feel that clearance, whatever it happens to be. Move on down here to the next fret and you do the same thing. And you do the next one and you do the same thing. If you have a high fret or a low fret, all of a sudden you're going to see a change in this clearance. So if you're back here, for instance, let's go here, and let's just say that this fret is high. Then all of a sudden I'm going to have a lot of clearance right here on this next fret. Or if this fret is low, all of a sudden I'm going to have less clearance right here. So you're going to see a change in the clearance, and then you have to determine whether you're looking at a high fret or a low fret, and you'll have to figure that out. You know, you can rock something on that, whatever. But at this point you've identified the location of the problem. Okay? So you do this, you check that clearance, go up here, you check that clearance, you go up here, you check that clearance, you work your way all the way down the neck. And fortunately, this guitar does not have any high frets. I just did a fresh fret job on it. And these are stainless steel frets, so that if there's any fret to string slap, it's going to be very, very obvious on stainless steel because they are bright suckers, you know. I have a video on that too. Alright, you do every single note. And it doesn't take that long, okay? It takes longer for me to talk about it than it does for you to do it. You go to this string, you check that clearance, you go to that one, you check that clearance. Now the differences between, let's say, the E string and the B string, they're not going to have the same clearance because of the way your shadow works. But for each string, you should see a fairly even difference in clearance as you go up. You would definitely see high notes. And again, like I said, you can play the note. If you play the note, be careful. Like I've got the guitar sitting on my shoulder right now and I'm down here plucking on it. Be sure you don't pluck the string, you know, like that or something. It's best to get the guitar in a playing position so that you're brushing straight across the strings. But, you know. Okay, so this guitar is good. I'm going to pause this video. I'm going to go get another guitar that is not good, and we will see some actual buzzes happening over there. So now we're going to go down here, and we're going to find the problem. I'm going to start about right here. Make sure we're in the camera here. And I've got clearance. I've got a lot of clearance, actually. I'll go up here. I got a lot of clearance. Let's play the note. Up here. That clearance is getting less. Up here. Uh-oh. Looky there. So you might think, oh, that's a high fret. Well, let's keep going. Not much clearance. Not much clearance at all. Wow, that's almost sitting on the fret right there. Okay. It definitely was not like this. Now, you know what this is due to? It's due to too much neck relief. It's got excess neck relief. You might think that when a neck has relief, and you check relief like this, okay? Bop this down there so you can see. You check relief by one way to check it, one quick way to check it, is to hold the string at the 1st fret, hold it down here at the 12th fret, and then you reach over here about the 6th fret, and you look at the relief. And this is, I'm going to switch hands here, a lot of relief. I'll measure that for you, but I'll bet you it's around 14 thousandths of an inch or something like that. It's quite a bit of relief. It's more relief than I went home with, that's for sure. The problem with this relief, let's just assume it's 14, okay, because that's what it feels like. The problem with relief is you might think that the neck goes like this and bows up, okay? So in other words, you might think it's here and the whole neck comes up like this so that the nut rises up. But that's not what happens. What happens is because the neck is on the body at an angle like this, the neck is on the body at about a 2-degree angle. So when the neck bows, I can't make my hand bow backwards. It bows like this. Okay? So you end up with a scoop down here. You end up with a hole, a dip in the neck. Then what happens is your strings here are trying to climb out of that dip, and when they do that, they buzz in this area. The neck can't bow right here, right? Because there's a heel. And it's not going to bow for probably about right there, because the effect of this fat area of the neck, you know, all the relief is out here in the middle of the neck. There's not much relief over here at the nut. There's not much relief over here. The majority of the relief is going to be right in here. It's not going to affect it right here. So what happens is you get a dip like this that comes up to the heel. The heel's not going to move. The strings right here have lots of clearance, which is fine. They're down in that dip. But as they start to come out of that dip in exactly this location right there, you get buzzes. So the problem here is not necessarily with the frets not being level or anything like that. The problem is it's got too much relief. So what happened to this guitar in particular, I'm not sure. Sometimes if the neck gets dry, the wood will shrink, and consequently you get a bow in the neck. You get a relief like this. It could be that it's not been humidified enough, but I kept it here in the shop for 2 weeks, and I'm looking at 49% relative humidity, so that's not the problem. The problem is probably simply that it's a little bit of a weak neck. At some point or another, this fingerboard might have been playing such that the string stress has pulled it into a bow. So I got to get rid of the bow in the neck. Now there's a couple ways to do this, which is another topic anyways. But I don't like to shape the fingerboard much. It looks to me like this fingerboard has been shaped already because the dots are a little close to the front edge. The fingerboard looks thin to me. So that's not the approach I'm going to use. The approach I'm going to use is to use compression frets in there. And that will hold the neck in place and make it stiffer. And we're going to get it. But this is a prime example here of how to troubleshoot the guitar. The owner says it's buzzing. Well, it wasn't buzzing when I sent it home. So I know something has changed. So the very first thing I did was come in here and do this next fret business. I fret that one. I started up here, you know. Fret that one. Look at that clearance. Fret this one. Look at that clearance. Fret this one. Look at the clearance. Fret this one. And the clearance is getting smaller. I get down to here and there's like almost no clearance at all. And by the time I get to this note here on the 12th fret, the string is actually literally almost laying on the 13th fret. Alright, so you've got a rise right here, which is not really a rise. What you have is a dip down here. A lot of people call it that. They call it the hump up here, but it's not a hump. It's due to a dip in the middle of the neck and not a hump up here. So rather than lower this section, you need to raise this section. If you have an adjustable truss rod, it's easy to do, but if you don't have an adjustable truss rod, you've got to reduce the relief here. Okay? So there's an example of how to use the next fret technique to find a buzz or whatnot. Now, as an aside, I'm going to move the camera a little bit. As an aside, I use the next fret technique to set the nut height. So here's the nut slots. And what you can do is fret it right here on the first fret. And you can measure this gap right here if you want to measure it. And 12 thousandths of an inch it happens to be. It's just a little bit more than 12. So you measure that gap. Now, the string is at the fret height right here. Right? Because the height of this fret determines how high the string is right here. Now the saddle does totally, but what I'm getting at is this. Have you ever watched Leonard Skinner? I bet most people have. When they go to play Freebird, he takes the thing, pencil it looks like, sticks it under here, under the strings, and presto, instant slide guitar without doing a different nut. In effect, this nail is the nut. This nail is a higher fret at this point. So that's why I'm calling this the fret height. So you see, if you measure this gap now, it's massive. Take it out, fret it again. You know, this is now the nail. What's this gap? Well, you can measure it and you can look at it. It's 12 thousandths of an inch. Therefore, if you were to slide back here to the nut, then this gap right here should be 12 thousandths of an inch, or a little bit more, because you're further back, the nut's going to wear a little bit. So I like to say, okay, it should be about maybe 16 thousandths of an inch. If this one was 12, then this gap right here should be a little bit more, should be maybe 14. Because you're going to allow for a little bit of wear and tear on the nut eventually, you might want to call it 16 thousandths of an inch. So you stick your feeler gauge in here, and you find out that it's quite a bit higher than 14 thousandths right now. It's probably closer to 16 or 18. which is okay. Point is, that's 20. It's a little high. So again, I'm seeing some movement in here for some reason or another that I didn't have the nut that high when I sent this guitar home. So this is the next fret technique. You fret this note, you measure this, or look at it, or whatever you want to do, and then you look at this and you can say, man, look at that, that's way higher than this gap. You see? So here's this gap, which looks to me probably like it's about 10 thousandths of an inch. This gap is probably about 12 thousandths of an inch, and this gap is 20 thousandths of an inch. Way higher in proportion. This gap ought to be more like about 16 or 18. Okay? That's using the next fret technique to estimate the nut slot. It's telling me now that there's something wrong with the nut slot. The second way, of course, to check the nut is to hold it down at this string at the 3rd fret, and you look at this gap right here, and it's pretty big. I mean, I'm flexing that quite a bit. This is tricky though, because this is a very, 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 very small gap right here. It's a little bit hard to see sometimes, and a very small difference here can mean a very big difference right here. So I like to do this as a quick and dirty test, but I also like to flip it over here and measure this gap and then measure this gap, and that tells me like how far off really am I off. That also is an example of using the next fret clearance technique. Okay? So it's a pretty useful technique to know. You can use it to check for the effects of neck relief. You can use it to check for your nut slot height, whether they're too high or too low, and you can use it to check for high or low frets. And again, you can identify the problem of a buzz. So if you go through here and every single one has a lot of clearance, you're not hitting any high or low spots, then your buzz is probably not coming from the frets. It's probably coming from the tuners, a loose brace, a ball end rubbing on the pins, who knows what. You know, you got to go find out where it is now. Buzzes are not always caused by the frets. So, okay, that's the next fret technique. Maybe you can use it. I use it all the time, constantly. Okay, bye-bye.